But we begin with this country's efforts to acquire a vaccine for COVID-19. The federal government has signed a deal with Pfizer and Moderna to secure millions of doses of their vaccine candidates in 2021. Last week, both companies began phase 3 clinical trials. That's when the vaccine is given to thousands of people. The government says it also plans to make orders with multiple other companies. But if a vaccine is found, when can Canadians expect to receive it? Anita Anand is the Minister of Public Services and Procurement. We reached her by Skype in Oakville. And for transparency's sake, I would like to disclose that my husband does work in the department as a civil servant. Hello, Minister.
Hi.
Now, you say that Canadians are going to be at the front of the line when a vaccine is approved. I wonder if you can tell us, what does that mean concretely? If this is not a Canadian-developed vaccine, are we talking a month of other countries, 6 months? What should Canadians expect?
Well, let's start with my role as the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, which is to ensure that we are negotiating and finalizing agreements for vaccines once they are discovered and produced. And that's exactly what I'm doing. And we're negotiating multiple contracts with multiple suppliers to ensure that when a vaccine is discovered, Canada is well placed to receive it. In terms of the deal that was announced this morning with Pfizer, for example, we are contemplating deliveries in 2021. But I want to stress how uncertain the environment is at the current time. Given that multiple vaccines are in clinical trials at the current time, we are not certain about delivery dates for these vaccines. And so we need to make sure that we recognize that this is a very competitive and uncertain global environment. And what Canada is doing, and I as minister am doing, is to ensure that we have multiple contracts in place with multiple suppliers so we don't put all our eggs in one basket.
I think we can all appreciate the uncertainty, but I go back to my question about what let's say a best case scenario, if it is not a vaccine that is developed in Canada. Like, what does front of the line mean? What is the best that Canadians can hope for?
Again, the question is difficult to respond to only because there has not been a vaccine that has been developed at the current time. And so in negotiating these contracts, we are contemplating delivery dates in 2021 on the assumption clinical trials will be successful. We know that the New England Journal of Medicine has said that Moderna's clinical trials are looking very good, and we are using all the best science and the vaccine task force that was announced this morning's recommendations to proceed with our contractual negotiations. And again, as the contracting authority for government, our goal is to diversify our vaccine supply chains so that we have multiple opportunities to bring vaccines into Canada and indeed to produce them here at home if that's possible, so that Canadians are well served, they're protected, and we can administer these vaccines.
Given all that uncertainty that you described, should Canadians also prepare themselves for a scenario where a country or a whole block of countries vaccinates its entire population before Canadians start seeing that vaccine?
The contractual negotiations that we are involved with are bilateral primarily, and in that regards, what other countries are doing in terms of their approach to vaccinations isn't as salient for us as what our public health guidance is telling us. And so at the current time, we're following the vaccine task force, we're following what the Public Health Agency of Canada says, and we are entering into these contracts to ensure that we have our hands in many pies for vaccines.
I think when we think of vaccines, one of the names that Canadians will be the most familiar with, we've heard a lot of optimism around these Oxford University trials. Is that one of the options that Canada is looking at? Have you secured anything vis-a-vis that vaccine?
Well, thank you for mentioning that particular company, but I would like to stress that more than focusing on one supplier, what we are doing and what I'm doing as minister is saying to my team that we need to look at domestic capability as well as a broad range of international suppliers. And the leading candidates, the leading clinical trials that are going on in the world are certainly on our radar screen. But I will say
that sounds like a yes. That sounds like negotiations are underway.
Thinking very broadly.
I want to ask about another vaccine candidate. If we do indeed read that, I guess, some optimism there. A source of concern, though, the partnership that Canada has with CanSino Biologics, right, the Chinese company. The National Post has reported that 2.5 months after a deal with that company was signed, Canadian researchers are saying they still haven't received vaccine samples, that they believe they are being held up by Chinese customs. Is there a political issue here, given our relationship with China?
Listen, I want to go back to our deliveries of PPE. We have received over 100 flights of PPE from China. And so in terms of our procurements and my role as minister, we have not witnessed an issue from a political angle. And in terms of the CanSino vaccine, we are very much hoping that we will be able to bring that home and continue the trials here. But this is an ongoing issue. And I want to stress to you that there is no easy negotiation in the contracts that we are signing with multiple suppliers. These are very intense times and they call for very intense negotiations.
Do you believe there is a political element with this particular vaccine, though? Certainly that is what is being suggested by some observers in the Canada-China relationship.
I have heard that. My concern at the current time is just making sure that we have contracts in place. And so that's why I say to my team, look, we need to diversify ourselves. We need to make sure we are hedging our risk. And how do we do that is that we have multiple supply chains operating simultaneously. And that's exactly what we're going to keep on doing in order to serve Canadians to the very best of our ability.
When it comes to the actual capacity to make a successful vaccine candidate, how much work is there still to do for that to be a possibility in Canada? Is that something that we have the ability to do right now, just in terms of the actual physical capabilities?
There are certain elements that require retooling and revamping as well as development of vaccines. And in terms of domestic production and development, there is work to do just as there is around the world. And that's why our government has invested over $600 million in research and $56 million announced today by Minister Baines to further clinical trials right here at home. So I want to stress to you the importance of the domestic piece, just as we used to discuss in terms of PPE, as well as the international piece. Diversifying supply chains here is what this game is about.
How confident should Canadians be? I mean, I appreciate that you are saying there is uncertainty in this. I think people understand that. But when it is difficult to clearly understand what it means, for instance, when you say Canadians will be at the front of the line, I just wonder how confident they should feel hearing what you've had to say today.
Throughout this pandemic, I have continually spoken to Canadians, as our Prime Minister, to emphasize that we will be here for Canadians, as we have been with the CERB and the wage subsidy and helping vulnerable populations, seniors and students and the Indigenous peoples. And the case is no different with vaccines. We are procuring vaccines, entering into contracts because the interests of Canadians is what matters most.
Before I let you go, I do want to ask you one question on another topic. It's something that has been dominating the news over the past couple of weeks, and that is the situation involving this agreement with the We charity. It has raised some serious questions about conflict of interest in this government, and I would like to ask you, just as I would like to ask other ministers in this government, do you think that you would be able to keep your job if you violated the Conflict of Interest Act multiple times?
Listen, We are very focused on serving Canadians at the current time, and the focus of my announcement and every single day, the focus of my work is to ensure that we have PPE and vaccine contracts in place for Canadians. I got into politics in order to serve Canadians, and I feel very honored and fortunate that I've been able to help Canadians through this pandemic through our procurements. And that's what I'm focused on, and that's what I will continue to be focused on as the Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Presumably, though, you also, part of that process of getting into politics is agreeing to follow the rules. And I wonder what you would say about the obligation of public office holders, including members of your government, to do that. If you were to break those rules, do you think you would keep your job as a cabinet minister?
Listen, I believe in process. I am a lawyer and a law professor by training, and I know the rules relating to process. And I know that our government is following and abiding by the request from the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. And that's exactly what I would suggest we continue to do.
Thank you very much for your time today, Minister Anand.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.